Hey everyone, Al Fragnoli, League of Leaders. We've got a very familiar face with us, Mr. John Burt. John, it's exciting to have you back. We've got a really, really good agenda that we're going to be talking about here. I'm excited to chat with you a little bit about it. John, thanks so much for coming on and talking with us today.
Absolutely, Al. Great to be here again.
So most of our audience already knows you, but why don't you give us a little 20-second spiel about you again? Who's John Burt? What are some of your past experiences? What are you doing right now? Just give us a little quick rundown on you.
Absolutely, Al. Well, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Al, as you know, I'm a leadership coach or a leadership strategist for companies. I spent 26 years working in the management consulting industry. So I worked with a number of corporate executives at the C-suite and all different levels within companies to help them to improve their business processes, their business culture, and of course to help them in their leadership challenges. And so now I'm doing that full time as a leadership coach and culture coach.
That's fantastic, John. I love it. I love what you do. We're doing the same thing here. We're out to impact others and make people the best leaders that they possibly can. So thank you for being a great servant leader. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit today. We've chatted about this a lot, John. I've seen you post a lot of stuff and share a lot of great research and articles out there in the last year or so about the Great Resignation. So everybody's heard of that by now. It's something to really, really dive into and to look into. And that's what we're going to talk extensively about here today. So, the Great Resignation, we're seeing people leave the workforce in droves, unlike we've ever seen before. So, what have we really learned about why people are leaving their current roles? What is it that's forcing them out of their current job and industry? Why are they doing it? So we're really going to dive into it, John. A couple things that I really want to start off with here is, first of all, culture. We talk about culture a lot. A lot of the clients that we work with, culture is top of mind, right? So let's talk about culture and let's talk about really that inauthentic mission and purpose statement. If a company has that, and if a company potentially might not be focused on culture, what are some of the instances that you've seen, John, or some of the research and data that you've seen behind these two principles here?
Yeah, well, let's start off with the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle. Like you said, most everybody has heard about this, Al, but just to kind of put some data points around this. Starting in the fall or maybe late summer of last year, we started seeing statistics showing that the number of job separations and quits, job people quitting their jobs in the U.S. has really just jumped up to some record levels where greater than 4 million people have left their jobs every month since around August of last year, and that continues through April. End of April was the last that we had some firm numbers on that. So last year alone, we had 70 million people change jobs in the US. That's a record number. Now, of course, there's a lot of pent up demand for change related to the pandemic. But there's a lot of folks that have basically just had a rethink about, what are they doing? What's their purpose? What do they enjoy about work? And so there are some changes that are being made by people out there at this particular moment. And it looks like it might be slowing down a little bit because of the recessionary fears and perhaps that there's some maybe some changes that are occurring here, but still there's 11 million jobs open. Unemployment is at record lows right now. So it's a job hunters market. One of the statistics I recently learned, Al, was that there are 40%, between 40 and 44% of all people within companies are looking for a new job. Now they may not go, they may not move, but there are people who, if you're looking at your workforce as a leader, you got to realize that nearly 50% of the people that you have working for you are out actively looking for a new job. That's got to be pretty scary. Um, to come back to the topics that you mentioned, you said that toxic, we're talking about toxic workforce, and you and I have talked a lot about that. There was a study that came out late last year from MIT Sloan, one of my favorite research groups, stating that toxic culture is 10 times more likely to be a predictor of people leaving their jobs than any other factor, and that includes compensation. So everybody thinks it's, people are leaving for the money, and they may ultimately be leaving for money, but they are also, that toxic culture, the lack of support, kind of an overbearing or a micromanager boss, lack of respect, lack of recognition for the work that they're doing. These are factors that are adding culture, which is driving people to look for other alternatives.
Yeah, John, this is interesting stuff that you just mentioned right there. So, first of all, I took some notes here. 4 million people per month from last August to this April leaving the workforce. 70 million people total that have roughly left their jobs. 11 million open jobs. 40 to 44% of people, average numbers right there, looking for other jobs. You mentioned that that's scary. That is scary, John, because as a leader, we have to retain our top talent. This is almost 1 in 2 people are looking for jobs elsewhere. So that is very, very scary. Talk about culture a little bit, John, and let's really drive in. Culture isn't just about a company's mission or purpose statement. It's a lot deeper than that. And that's what leaders must understand. So talk a little bit about the importance of culture and why a leader has to really, really focus on his or her company's culture if they want to retain their top people.
Yeah, I mean, Al, good point, right? There are many, many studies out there that link culture to operating performance, and in fact, the vibrancy and the health of a company's culture is a early indicator or leading indicator for how well that company is going to perform financially. Right. So, so there are plenty of studies. So leaders should recognize that the strong culture, the better the employee engagement, and not just, employees saying that they like their job, but they're inspired or they're motivated in terms of doing the work at the company. If you can get that level of engagement with your employees, you're going to drive some outstanding business results in your company. So those linkages are all there. What we find, and I found this in my work career, is that we would look, I would see our own, but I'd also see clients where they'd be measuring their what they call their employee satisfaction survey, which was maybe once a year or once every 6 months. These were reports that were coming in the the 20s, 30s, and 40%. So if you're only 20 or 30% of your employees are actually engaged in the work, you can imagine what the opportunity is, or is for improving that to get even better operating performance. So there's a strong linkage between culture and operating performance.
Absolutely, absolutely. And employees, you mentioned employee engagement. Employees must feel engaged. It's critically important for leaders to understand that, for companies to understand that employee engagement, if people feel inspired and motivated, these are really, really key things that leaders must focus on if they're going to retain top talent, if they're going to reach the next level and be an excellent vibrant company for years and years to come. Talk a little bit, John, about inauthentic mission and purpose statements. So if a company has an inauthentic mission and purpose statement, if people can't really relate to it, what are some of the dangers behind that if companies have this?
Yeah, well, I think this is one of those things that came out of the recession, or the pandemic, as people were rethinking. A lot of people were spending their time at home, right? They had a lot more time to think about what their job meant, what it was, how it related, and how closely tied their own personal desires and their own personal values were associated with the company. And what the conclusion that a lot of studies are showing is that people understand that there's a profit motivation for companies. They of course recognize that, but they also want the mission to be authentic. So if you're going to say that you're authentic with regard to clean environment, or sustainable packaging, or whatever your company is doing, they want to see that in reality. They want to see the practices be focused on that. And so many companies, I think, that when they get into trouble or they wind up running into a rough spot, all of those value statements and pronouncements that they make in the press, they wind up going by the wayside. But the company's employees recognize this. They recognize that leaders are not being consistent. They're not being focused. They're not being authentic in terms of the articulating the mission for the companies. And I don't know that and this can be at all levels, right? It can be at the first line manager, but it can also be a CEO that maybe makes a statement in the press that winds up wiping out any sort of statements that they've made around environment or DEI or any of the other elements that we typically see in terms of value statements or CSRs that companies have in their communications deck. So it is something that I think a lot of people have started to recognize that my company's values are not aligned with mine, or my company is inconsistent. My leadership in my company is inconsistent in terms of the messaging. It may be a little bit of a marketing spin versus real core values, core beliefs within the company.
You mentioned some interesting points. I love that you used the word marketing spin there at the end too. People can really see through if you've got an inauthentic mission statement. You're just kind of you're talking about clean energy. I know you used that example a couple of times, but you're doing nothing for the environment. People will see through to that, and they'll understand that it's just you trying to look good in the public's eyes, right? So, I love that you mentioned that, because that's a very dangerous thing that we can companies can go down, and they really have to be consistent with their mission statement. And you mentioned people finding meaning and purpose behind the work that they're doing. The last 2 years have been so challenging for all of us, as we know, throughout the entire world with this pandemic. So really finding meaning in the work that we're doing, why we're doing it, and does it align with the company that we're working for? And if not, that's in some instances why people are leaving the workforce in record numbers. So I love some of those things that you mentioned right there. John, if we could transition, I know we mentioned toxic leadership earlier in our conversation. If we can maybe dive a little bit deeper, that'd be fantastic. What are some of the dangers behind a toxic leader, potentially a leader that if I'm working for a boss, I believe that he or she may not care about me, my goals, my interests, where I want to be, my personal family life. When we have a toxic leader and a boss that doesn't really care about people, that could really affect culture, and that could really lead into that number of 40 to 44% of people actively looking for jobs. That's another indicator on why people are looking for jobs. Talk about some of the danger behind toxic leadership.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that companies are starting to see, Al, is that, I think we all recognize that the more diverse and the more participative our work environment is, the more teamwork that occurs in the work environment, in the workplace, the better off the company is, right? It's a diversity of ideas, but it's also inclusion in terms of getting everybody's ideas and being able to leverage the value of working as a team. I've seen this many times where you have a toxic leader comes in very very demanding, or has a particular kind of a rough approach toward his team. You'll have some people that will still stand up to that. But what winds up happening is, if you have a team of say a dozen people, and you only have two people that are doing all of the talking, you're losing the value of the other 10 people on the team. Right? And the leader thinks, oh, okay, that was a great meeting because we got things solved, or we set some dates, or we came up with some great ideas. But you've missed that opportunity to have the ideas and the contribution and then the buy-in, right? So it's there's the initial starting point, which is just getting the ideas on the table and having that vigorous dialogue and coming up with the very best ideas with all the contribution from the minds in the room. But then, leaving the room, there may only be one or two people on that team that are actually bought into the execution of those ideas. So everybody else is going back and saying, yeah, well, I didn't really participate in that discussion, or I didn't really believe, in what was being spoken about, or nobody really listened to my ideas. So they wind up, there's a certain amount of, civil disobedience, right? People just say, well, I wasn't involved in making that decision, so I'm not committed to the outcome or to the course of action that was decided by that team. And so you were losing the value of the employees on your team, the team members to contribute, but you're also losing something on further down the road when it comes to execution and fully participating and being bought in and committed to execution of the plan.
John, what I think about with some of the things you just mentioned there, and as I think about some of the top sports teams compared to some of the weaker ones, right? Or a team that might be right on the cusp of winning a championship, but they can't get over that hump. So you talked about having buy-in from everybody on the team. The top and most elite sports teams that are winning championships, they have the buy-in. The coach has the buy-in from everybody on the team, from whether it be a bench player to a starter, doesn't matter. Everybody knows their role and feels the importance to contribute to that team. So when you mention 2 people out of 10 that are contributing their ideas and contributions there, that's not having a lot of buy-in, and those are the teams that are going to struggle. So really, really important for leaders to ensure that everybody that they're leading feels that they're important and feels that their ideas matter, and they must buy in, as you mentioned. Talk a little bit, John, about flexibility. So we've seen a lot of companies, obviously, in the last 2 years, go to a virtual role. We see some companies, a lot of companies, now going back into the office or going back to a more of a hybrid role. Half the time in office, half the time virtual. Talk a little bit about the importance of companies to be open to this idea, to be flexible in their people's schedules.
Yeah, I think this is really important, and I think a part of this may be generational, Al. I was in a situation that I was a company right after the relaxation of some of the pandemic protocols, and people were coming back to the office. He wrote a memo basically to say everybody needs to be back in the office 5 days a week, and I asked him, I said, well, why 5 days a week? What's the rationale behind that? And he says, well, that's the way it's always been done. And I was thinking, well, that may be a more of a generational thing, that the way it's always been done, versus looking at what is it that you're trying to achieve by having people come together. I personally believe that having people together for certain functions is valuable, right? You get more collaboration, you get more buy-in. That doesn't necessarily mean that every day or every task needs to be a group thing. There are a lot of people that are in offices that are really distracted because they're in an open cubicle and there's a lot of noise and discussion around them, and they're trying to concentrate on a task. So there's a place for you're kind of alone and deep think time or concentration time, but there's also room for people working together in a collaborative space. I think what we found with the pandemic is that it's a forcing function that says we could do it, we can do it for short periods of time, or that there's a different model that's out there that does work. People don't have to be in the same office environment 5 days a week, 40 hours or 50 hours a week for the company to be successful. Now, what is the right model? I think each company will need to take a look at that. I think that management companies where they try to dictate. I was with a CEO, a biotech CEO, the other night at dinner, and I was asking how it was working within his company. And he says, well, I said, did you come up with a policy? He goes, no, we don't have a policy. And I said, well, that's interesting. And I said, how did you do it? And he goes, well, I just told my management team that I was going to be in the office Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And if you wanted to schedule a meeting with me in person, it's going to have to be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I didn't send a policy statement out. There was no rule that was a procedure that was applied, but everybody sort of self-mobilized and found what was working for their particular group. And it's still changing, right? Some groups need to collaborate with other different schedules, and but you'll find that rhythm, I think, if you're open to being flexible and letting the teams decide for themselves as much as possible, versus something that they feel has been dictated as a mandate from leadership. That's where the participative management and team buy-in will come in, and I think it'll be supported.
Absolutely, John. You mentioned some key things there that I took away is, let the teams decide, really work on that. Every company is going to be slightly different in their approach, of course, we know that, but really having that flexibility is critically important. John, you said, you talked early on about the leader that said, well, it's always been done that way. That is one of the biggest red flag statements I think I've ever can possibly hear. It's always been done that way. So, while it might have been done wrong, but it's always been done that way, so we're going to continue to do it that way. It's such a dangerous mindset for leaders to think that way. John, we've shared some amazing stuff so far today. I want to get a couple maybe bullet points from you, 2, 3, 4 really key ideas and points. How can we fix this? So how can leaders really retain their top talent? We talked about the Great Resignation, all these issues that companies are struggling with today. How can we really fix it? How can leaders really retain their top people and ensure that they're going to continue to grow?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that pop to mind, Al. One, of course, is that leaders need to grow themselves, right? Leaders need to be open to change. To come back to the comment we were just joking about, that's the way it's always been done. I think if leaders are prepared to grow and to, be flexible themselves, they will pass that flexibility along to their team. So the leaders need to be willing to listen to their employees. So active listening, I think, is very important, and especially now that we're in this Zoom mode. For people, the body language that you pick up, the words that they use, sometimes people are quiet or they have their cameras off or a number of different things. Leaders need to be more attuned to people who might be checking out or have checked out, and try to bring them back in. There needs to be an outreach, a more proactive outreach on the part of leaders to connect with employees, to listen to employees, and try to figure out where they're at any particular moment. I believe that there's about altruism. It's about affiliation. It's achievement and abundance. This kind of construct that I use, I think, helps with this idea that altruism is you need to have an authentic representation of what your company's mission is, and you need to be able to articulate that to the employees in terms of how is this company's values and purpose in the world contributing to the world, right? And as a leader, you need to be able to make that translation. It's not about all about making money. I think there's affiliation. Plenty of studies, Al, that show that people like to be associated with people that are like them or that have a common purpose, right? People like other people, right? And for the most part, there are a few people that are hermits, but for the most part, people need connection, and they like to connect with people who have a common set of values that they have. So the leaders themselves need to be able to work that together to make sure that, if you think about an employee who is turned off by something, it may be that they don't feel that they're included, or that there's equity in the workplace, that their ideas and their voice is heard. So, in terms of fostering that affiliation, the leader needs to go to work on that to make sure that everyone feels as though they're included and that they're part of this broader team. There's achievement, right? It's the leader needs to be able to articulate the goals of the company and the mission for that team such that everyone feels committed and everybody feels that their contribution is making a difference to get to the goal, but everybody's aligned on the same goal as well. And then there's abundance, which I think is, in my mind, is kind of a key one, that we live in an environment where we're all thinking that there's a scarcity of recognition, or scarcity of winning, or scarcity of promotions, and I think that it's the leader's responsibility to focus on the abundance, right? That if we work together, the world is our oyster. We can tackle anything. There's promotion opportunities, and there's opportunities for everybody to participate, versus this idea of scarcity where people are fighting for time and fighting for attention, and it breaks down the teamwork. So that's the model I use, Al. And so I think that there are a number of things, but it starts with the leader. The leaders are responsible for either success and prosperity and high performance, or they're equally responsible if there's a toxic culture, or if people are leaving, or people feeling that is not the right place for them. That comes to them over time, that it's not the right environment for them to thrive.
All fantastic stuff that you just shared right there, John. And it might sound so simple to you and I, but sometimes it's really, really challenging for leaders and for companies to really understand this, with all the challenges that they face on a day-to-day, with their day-to-day job. But obviously, we got to take care of our people. We got to be open to the idea of change. We got to be flexible. We got to listen to others, really actively listening to their concerns, and their thoughts and values and beliefs, and just caring about people. Really, that's what it ultimately comes down to. So I love some of those points that you just listed right there. And the leader you mentioned at the end there, the leader must take accountability. So if things are going well, that's a testament to them. But if they're not, and it's a toxic environment, they've got to look themselves in the mirror and say, how can I fix this? I often think about, again, I'm going to use a sports analogy, but some of the top coaches there, sports wise, even though they know as a leader, if the team is successful and doing well, that they've had a large part of that, they really tailor it and point that towards their people. That's the important thing for a leader to do. When things are going well, put all the spotlight on your people. Know that you've had a lot to do with it, but put all the spotlight on your people. When things are going poorly, do not point the finger elsewhere. Really take accountability and how are you as a leader going to fix it? So I love it. Great stuff that you shared, John. John, let's wrap it up real quick here. How can a leadership coach, we're both leadership coaches. We know that it's important for others to have leadership coaches. But why is it important for a leader or a company to invest in a leadership coach?
Well, for all the things that we've just talked about, Al, and the value that can be unlocked from having a better culture or mindful, maybe more aware leaders. So in that regard, I think that leaders need to take the responsibility to work on the culture. They need to, first of all, understand where are they today. There are a number of different tools that you and I use where we basically do a pulse or a check on the culture within the company, just to figure out, make sure that everybody is on the same page as issues are, the challenges are inside the company, and you get that across the segment of your entire employee population, trying to figure out what are the issues that they see, maybe not from the executive suite, but from the first line, frontline workers, and then between is what are people sensing within the company. Once you've got that, then you can target some very specific areas with some very overt plans that you're going to put into place, and then you monitor that, right, with the leadership to make sure that the leaders are walking the walk and that they're actually implementing and living by those new plans or the values and aspirations that they have as a company. You find this out fairly quickly. When I think back when Lou Gerstner took over from IBM, they were failing back in the early 90s. He came in with a breath of fresh air and he set the company on a different course, and immediately it popped up the people who weren't on board. And those are those toxic leaders that the CEO and the C-suite need to take the responsibility to either get that leadership corrected or have them move on for the benefit of the overall company. Now, I would say by and large, the leaders can get some development help because, as we pointed out earlier, many leaders may or may not be aware of their own behavior or how they're being perceived, and they may need some coaching. So I would say that the bulk of those leaders can be coached and start to recognize how their behaviors are actually being perceived by others. It's part of the coaching work that we use in the 360s, getting that self-awareness is a starting point for a lot of leaders to start to improve. So culture, leadership, and talent, those are the kind of the three underpinnings of a great company.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, John. Culture, leadership, talent, all critically important. Self-awareness, as you mentioned, critically important for leaders to be self-aware of how they live their lives and things that they're implementing day in, day out. John, we've shared some incredible, powerful stuff. Want to thank you again for coming on with us and talking. It's always an honor to chat with you a little bit about leadership. Absolutely love it. We know you're busy, so thank you so much for coming on and talking today again.
Oh, well, thank you. It's always
Absolutely, John. We look forward to talking with you soon. We thank everybody for tuning in and listening. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out, drop a line. We'd love to hear comments from you. Thank you so much.